Okay, the preamble reads as follows. The Libertarian Party wants all Americans to be able to plan their own futures. Libertarians believe that individuals, families, associations, and businesses have the right and the ability to deal with their own problems by working with other people in a peaceful and honest way. We reject the idea that the aggressive use of force, whether by criminals or government, is either a moral or practical means for achieving positive ends. Libertarians seek a world in which voluntary cooperation replaces force in human relationships. Toward that end, we offer the following 10-point program. I think a program is very important because it's a format which will be more widely read, and as it is read, the American people will realize that the Libertarians represent humanitarian principles and that the Democrats and the Republicans are the true voice of hooray for us and the hell with everyone else. Thank you. Regrettably, not all of our speakers are here at this moment. The next person I'd like to recognize is, who am I going to do? Ken? Ken's over there. Ken Bisson. Ken is going to talk to you about our plank on AIDS. Ken is a practicing physician. I think that qualifies him to know something about this disease, and perhaps through his readings he's come across some knowledge that he could share with us. Thank you.
Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, is one of America's most serious health problems. The search for a cure or relief should be of the highest priority. Libertarians hold that the first line of attack should be to remove governmental obstacles to finding a cure and to educate the public regarding protection against the disease. While past governmental policy affecting AIDS has been disastrous, private action has been successful. The virus believed to cause AIDS was discovered by a small private research organization, the Pasteur Institute in Paris. It is obvious that nothing should be allowed to stand in the way of AIDS sufferers seeking relief or of medical professionals trying to find a cure. The Libertarian Party proposes the following steps to further these ends. 1. Remove all impediments to research or testing regarding AIDS. 2. Allow any person who has AIDS or carries the virus to try any treatment or medicine, regardless of whether that treatment or medicine meets any other governmental regulations. 3. Federal Communication Commission and Postal Service regulations currently prevent people from getting information they need about AIDS research, treatment, and prevention. These regulations must be eliminated. And 4. Public schools and universities should suspend any regulations which prevent teachers, administrators, or student newspapers from distributing information about AIDS research, treatment, or prevention. I support this item of our program because its advancement can prevent many needless deaths. As a member of the AIDS Education Committee of my local government schools, I've seen that making AIDS education a political football has blocked the timely dissemination of information that can save lives. When AIDS is involved, the libertarian call for the separation of education and government is a call to save lives. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Bob Waldrop, who will talk to you about the plank entitled Federal Spending Must Be Cut. Bob has long been an activist in spending litigation, of opposition, and I think his work in Utah uniquely qualifies him to describe this plank to you. I don't know, maybe living in Utah qualifies you for a number of unique things. Federal spending must be cut. Federal spending and federal taxation are connected. We must reduce spending to reduce taxes. Unfortunately, the United States government has expanded its operations and spending far beyond the original constitutional plan. No matter what the subject, there is some group which wants government to regulate or subsidize it, and there are always those in Congress eager to take over more power and control. But it is impossible to get something for nothing.
The government produces no goods, so it can hand out favors to some people only by taking the earnings and property of others first. In recent years, the government has attempted to hide its expensive meddling by forcing private organizations and businesses to adopt certain expensive programs rather than have the government implement them directly. These programs are no less costly nor less intrusive than if they were adopted directly by the government. Libertarians join with the vast majority of Americans in calling for a smaller, less expensive, less meddlesome government. The following are some first steps in the process of bringing federal government spending under control. Number one, place the federal budget under a cap at current levels. Any increase in spending on any project must be accompanied by an equal or greater reduction in other spending. Number two, phase out spending on aid to foreign governments and international organizations such as the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Number three, phase out federal subsidies to all businesses such as the tobacco industry, the maritime industry, agriculture, or the military-industrial complex. Number four, end federal subsidy programs to state and local governments. These programs merely take taxes out of the community and then send the money back, minus the amounts consumed by the government bureaucrats who administer them. Number five, end all federally mandated programs forced on individuals, organizations, and businesses. I support this program because I, as an American, as a citizen of the state of Utah, and as a member of the Libertarian Party, am sick and tired and fed up with a government that can't even balance its own checkbook, which is mortgaging the future, which is mortgaging the financial futures of our great-grandchildren in order to pay for their addiction, which is worse than any heroin addiction that this country has ever seen, to spending other people's money. And it will stop and it will end only when we, the people of the United States, take a stake to Congress and drive it right through their heart so that like a vampire they will stay dead forever and will not come back to bother us anymore. And all the people said, amen!
I would like to thank Bob for that unemotional statement. It's okay. These are our friends. Our next speaker will be Rick Arnold. Rick will be talking to us about defending Americans in America. I think Rick knows something about this. He served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam, was awarded the Silver Star and the Bronze Star. Subsequently, he served as a foreign area specialist in the Defense Intelligence Agency. This is a man who has seen the front office and the back office and would like to talk to us about what we should do about it.
Thank you. Defending Americans in America. An important reason for having the federal government is the national defense. Its job to defend Americans in America from foreign attack. The federal government should work to provide security for us all at the lowest possible cost, in a way which does not undermine our domestic economic productivity or violate our civil liberties. U.S. military spending is over $300 billion per year. That's with a B. Rather than defending America, the bulk of this pays for defending other countries. People in many of these countries pay less for their own defense than the American taxpayer pays to defend them. The United States has many thousands of nuclear weapons, more than needed to deter a Soviet first strike. Yet each year, we spend billions every year building a larger inventory. U.S. military intervention in Central America, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East has not made Americans more secure. In fact, Americans are less secure because U.S. military policy has made us more enemies than friends, making all Americans targets of terrorism. American military adventurism routinely results in unnecessary bloodshed without producing positive results. The United States should rely less on military force and threats and more on negotiation and trade to establish harmonious international relationships. The Libertarian Party proposes the following initial steps to improve the security of Americans and reduce the costs of defense. First, notify our allies that they must plan for their own defense needs and take responsibility for paying for them. provide our allies with a timetable for the return of all American military personnel to America to defend America. Negotiate arms reductions treaties which do not compromise our national defense. Adopt a policy that Americans who travel abroad and companies which invest abroad do so at their own risk and are subject to the laws and customs of other countries while abroad. The United States will no longer use gunboat diplomacy on their behalf at taxpayers' expense. Reject the, quote, Reagan doctrine, which engages the United States around the globe and risks the security of all Americans by increasing the possibility that the U.S. will become embroiled in a foreign civil war. Thank you.
Among the burning issues that we hear about over and over, especially in September it seems, is the education of our children. There seems to be broad-based dissatisfaction in this country about what government-run public schools are providing. To speak on choice in education, we've selected Steve Dasbach, who happens to be a member of the program committee and the drafter of this plank. Steve is a high school science teacher at Whitco High School in Whitley, Indiana. It's a government-run public school. He's the father of 4. He's concerned with his children and with all of our children, and he'll speak to you now.
Choice in education. Government-run public schools have failed our children. Their costs keep rising while student performance drops. Today, 1 out of 5 teenagers can't even read at grade school level, and colleges must teach many students how to read and write. Poor students suffer most because they attend the worst schools. Few families can afford tuition for private schools while paying taxes for public schools. Private schools provide better education at a much lower cost. Most families have no choice but to send their children to the neighborhood public school regardless of its quality. This makes public schools a protected monopoly, and like most protected monopolies, they do a poor job of serving the public. Education suffers. The same lack of choice frequently compels families to send their children to problem schools. Youngsters are exposed to violence, drugs, and other threats. Without other choices, parents feel helpless to change this. The libertarian approach to education is to let parents choose the education that is best for their child. The following steps should be taken immediately to promote choice and return control of education to parents and students. Number 1, allow parents to send their children to the teacher and the school of their choice by implementing a voucher system. Eliminate the U.S. Department of Education, which spends billions on administration and educates no one. Institute tax credits for any person or company which pays for the education of any student or any number of students at any school, public or private. And finally, remove restrictions that limit such private educational choices as homeschooling. I've spent 14 years as a public school teacher. I've experienced 2 state-mandated curriculum projects, longer school days, longer school years, increased graduation requirements, minimum competency testing, and massive spending increases. None of it has had any effect on the education of our kids. The thing that will have an effect is letting parents make the decision about where to send their kids and where to have the dollars to support education to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Our next speaker will be Dick Bodie. Dick will talk to you about free trade and neutrality. Dick knows something about the free market.
He's an adjunct professor of free market economics at Chapman College as well as the University of California at Irvine. Dick? Free trade and neutrality. The Libertarian Party supports a foreign policy that is designed to promote peace and honest trade between Americans and all other people. Thomas Jefferson stated, "Peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none." Libertarians would say free trade and neutrality. Many people speak of protectionism, but protectionism hurts the consumer. That's you and me. Protectionism drives up the price of clothing. Protectionism drives up the price of shoes. Protectionism drives up the price of automobiles and other goods by billions and billions of dollars each and every year. Protectionism favors special interests, eliminates jobs, in spite of what most of you or most of us have been led to believe. Protectionism raises the cost of living for each and every person in this country. Both Democratic and Republican administrations have for many decades employed a foreign policy of intervention which disrupts free trade. Since Americans would never tolerate other nations interfering with our internal affairs, we therefore should not interfere in the affairs of other nations. We should stop immediately using military and covert operations to prop up or topple any government in this world. We should rely on the obvious benefits of trade to promote human rights and free markets throughout the world. Free international trade promotes peace because people trading with their neighbors do not want war to interrupt their prosperity. When trade is restricted by embargoes, quotas, and tariffs, clearly history has shown that the likelihood of war increases. The following are some steps which should be taken immediately to promote more harmonious trading relationships. 1. The United States should return to its historical foreign policy of free trade and neutrality. 2. The United States government should repeal all laws which hamper trade with people in other countries. 3. The United States government should repeal all laws which restrict the right of Americans to travel to other countries. Think about it. It works. One last thing, and I can't leave without it. I must say that Arthur Ashe and others who are concerned about the rights and the problems of the black people in South Africa, I'm in total accord with them. I find the problem is that they do not understand free trade and neutrality. They do not understand that the sanctions and the boycotts which have been used to help the black people in South Africa have done nothing but hurt them. And I think others should begin to open their eyes. Thank you. Thank you, Dick. An issue that is always a political issue and is always an emotional issue is taxes. Taxes will probably always be an issue so long as there are taxes. I certainly feel so. Taxes have been an issue not for 10 years, not for the 200 some odd years of history of this country, but for thousands of years. Always an emotional topic. To discuss taxes with you, we've picked a gentleman who we feel will be able to refrain from extreme emotion, Mr. Marshall Fritz. Marshall is president of the Advocates for Self-Government, a not-for-profit organization which seeks to educate people about new ideas. Marshall, will you share your thoughts with us?
One of our goals is to replace taxation with voluntary methods for financing government services. Now, the government uses force to collect taxes. if you don't pay taxes voluntarily, your property may be seized and you may be imprisoned. I think that's an applause of recognition, not of approval. I hope. If any organization or person other than our government tried this, we'd call it stealing, wouldn't we? It's wrong for private citizens to take other people's property, and if it is, then it's wrong when a government does it. When taxation takes money or property from private citizens and transfers it to the government, economic productivity goes down. Employers cannot expand. Businesses fail, and jobs are lost. We've seen this repeatedly, particularly during the last 70 years since the federal income tax was introduced. Even successful businessmen must still pass on the cost of taxes to consumers. Everyone loses, except for the government. Experience shows that government is inefficient. Government services can be provided better by private businesses, private charities, and other community organizations. To begin the process of replacing taxation with voluntary financing of government activities, we propose these 4 points. 1, neither Congress nor any state legislature should create any new tax or increase any tax rate from this day forward. Find out who wrote that and then sell him a bid, huh? 2, a sunset provision should be added to every tax statute. Such a provision would end the particular tax after 2 years unless it was reenacted. 3, the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution should be amended to provide for a binding initiative process where the voters can repeal any tax by majority vote. Recognition and approval, I think. And 4, tax money should no longer subsidize any government service which it can possibly be provided in the private sector. And I'd like to add on a personal note, many of you know that I'm a Christian, and I want to borrow from the words of Ray Ransberger and say, I don't own anything that belongs to Caesar. Thank you. Thank you.
Nominations will soon be open for Best Award by a Supporting Actor. Thank you, Marshall. The next blank deals with pollution. It's entitled Pollution is Trespass. That is our approach to dealing with problems of pollution. It involves knowledge of the law and what trespass is. And to speak on that, we've asked our 1984 presidential candidate, David Bergland, who is an attorney, to come forward and present this blank.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Pollution is a trespass. One person or company removes trash, foul air, or foul water from his property and dumps it on the property of others without their consent. Fairly simple to understand that. The victims of pollution should be able to sue the polluter, require him to stop, and collect damages. The best way to understand why we have the high level of air and water pollution we have today is to recognize that the responsibility for protection of the environment has been turned over to a government bureaucracy. Today's failures are a result of the ineffectiveness of the government to deal with such important issues. Faceless bureaucrats can never be as effective in fighting pollution as individual citizens, provided that we give the citizens the tools they need to do so. The following are some initial steps to deal with the pollution, and we have 2 initial steps. 1, clearly establish the legal right of individuals or groups to claim that pollution of their body, their property, the water on or under it, and the air above it is a trespass. This would include a broad definition of property rights to include air and water. 2, end all bureaucratic regulatory attempts to define an acceptable level of pollution or pollutants. Setting such standards has the effect of legally sanctioning that amount of pollution, even when it might be reduced below that level. It also deprives citizens of the right to successfully claim damages from lesser levels of pollution. All over the world, people are turning away from bureaucracy and socialist forms of government in favor of free markets based on private property, because those sorts of legal systems work better. The evidence is clear. Privately owned property is better cared for than bureaucratically managed property, which is always subject to the latest political whims. Let's end socialist control of the government to protect it better. Thank you.
Thank you, David. How many of you have watched a news program in the last week that did not have a lead story on drugs? We picked one that's right there this instant. Solving the drug problem. The difference is libertarians don't think the problem is what everyone else necessarily thinks the problem is. We see the results, but we don't necessarily agree on what the cause of the problem is. To address this, we've called on Steve Dillon of Indiana. Steve is uniquely qualified. He's an attorney, and for the last 14 years, he's specialized in defending individuals charged with violation of drug offenses. He has seen the drug laws, their enforcement, the people who are affected by it, from a very much different angle than almost any of the rest of the people in this country. And he's here to offer his unique perspective. Steve?
Solving the drug problem. Libertarians want to see all Americans healthy and free from drug dependence. However, we recognize that criminal penalties for the sale, transportation, possession, or use of drugs have not solved and cannot solve this problem. Similar penalties were tried when alcoholic beverages were outlawed over 60 years ago. The failure of this approach was recognized and prohibition was repealed. Prohibition spawned organized crime. Today's drug laws keep it going. Criminal penalties for drug trafficking reduce supplies, force drug prices up, and make drug dealing very profitable. High prices lead to violent crimes committed by a small number of addicts who may steal or murder to feed their habits. Most victims of these crimes are innocent non-users. Prohibition resulted in many deaths from bathtub gin. Today we read of deaths from the use of adulterated drugs. There is no difference. There is no consumer protection for impure illegal drugs, and dead users can't prosecute their suppliers. The substance that causes the greatest problem is alcohol. The most physically damaging and the most addictive drug is tobacco. For every death caused by the use of illegal drugs, there are almost 100 deaths caused by the use of alcohol or tobacco. Yet few suggest that either alcohol or tobacco should be banned. The Libertarian Party does not advocate the use of drugs. The Libertarian approach recognizes that the drug problem is worsened by the use of criminal law to attempt to halt the drug problem and drug use. However foolish people may be, they should have the right and the responsibility to determine for themselves what to put in their own bodies. The law should reflect that right. The following reforms should be instituted immediately. Number 1, decriminalize the possession of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, and other controlled substances for personal use. Alaska and the Netherlands have already done this for marijuana and experienced no problems. The British have done this for heroin with similar results. Number 2, hold people who commit crimes or cause accidents while under the influence of any drug, including alcohol, fully responsible and liable for their actions. Number 3, repeal all laws and regulations which impede the establishment of private drug programs. In my experience, I can tell you that it's not a war on drugs, folks. It's a war on our citizens and our Constitution, and we're losing it. Drugs are everywhere. One effect of this war is alienation of young people from authority figures. For example, if the government lies to the young people about marijuana, then they won't believe them and the facts about crack cocaine. The court systems are breaking down all over the country. The prison systems are breaking down. They're totally overcrowded. People who need help and are addicted can't get it. They just go to prison where there's no treatment and they learn more criminal activity. People who have glaucoma and cancer chemotherapy can't get marijuana, even though it does help as a medical effect because of government regulations. Prohibition is expensive, both in money and in manpower. We could better use our time and our money to prevent us from violent crime. Much crime and corruption is in the United States merely because it's illegal. Prohibitions aren't American, and they don't work. We must change our approach. Thank you.
Another highly emotional subject is that of immigration. We all came from someplace else, almost all of us. Yet now we seem to close our doors. To talk about this, we've selected a person who's been touched by this very closely. Ahmad was a Palestinian refugee. He was born on a ship bound from Palestine to the United States in free waters. The ship had a U.S. flag on the back of it, but he was denied U.S. citizenship at birth. At the age of 22 months, he was naturalized as an American citizen. As I said, this has touched Dean very closely, and he'd like to tell you why he supports our immigration plank.
This is the text of the plank. Immigration. America grew and developed as a result of the efforts of millions of immigrants who fled their homelands to seek a better life in our land. Libertarians believe that all Americans are best served if the doors to our nation remain free and open. Many fear that the welfare programs which we have created would act as a magnet to draw immigrants to America. Some say that being poor in America offers a higher standard of living than many can attain in their homelands. We agree. However, this is not a good reason to slam our doors shut on those who seek freedom and an opportunity to prosper through their own honest efforts. If anything, the situation calls for reform or end of these welfare programs. Others fear that immigrant labor would throw Americans out of work. In fact, what will happen is that greater competition will develop for jobs, particularly in the area of unskilled labor. The principal result of this competition can only be a reduction in labor cost, which will ultimately be passed on to all American consumers in the form of price reductions on labor-intensive goods and services. Those who object most strenuously to an open-door policy are those labor groups which stand to gain the most from monopolizing the labor market. America was once respected around the world as a symbol of peace and freedom, a land of opportunity. People voted with their feet. They left much behind to come to the United States. We should return to the proud tradition of welcoming all who would join us, wishing them well and allowing them to earn their way. To quickly achieve an open-door policy, we endorse the following immediate steps. 1. Amend all welfare and benefit programs to exclude coverage and services from anyone who is not a U.S. citizen. 2. 2, repeal all laws and regulations which require a work permit or some other form of government approval for a foreign citizen to work in the United States. 3, eliminate all immigration quotas. Do I have to explain why I support this? No. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Our 10th blank deals with health care and health costs. Earlier, we had a physician speak to you on the subject of AIDS. Another medical professional, Margaret Freese, who's been a nurse since 1974, will talk to you about health care and health costs.
Health care and health costs. Health care is far too important to trust to the government. That simple statement may sound extraordinary, but it is quite true. What can be more important to each of us than the continuing health of ourselves and our loved ones? Yet over the past decades, we've increasingly allowed our government to have a greater and greater involvement in our health care. Perhaps this might make sense if the government had a strong record for achievement in this area. Unfortunately, quite the opposite is true. The Food and Drug Administration has a dismal record. The time required to approve new drugs and treatments for use by doctors is far too long. Many patients suffer or die while bureaucrats cause long delays. Terminally ill patients who have no other hope are routinely denied experimental drugs which may have a beneficial effect on their condition. Only the wealthy can afford to travel abroad to get treatment which is denied here. Increasing subsidies for health care, including Medicare and Medicaid, have resulted in skyrocketing medical costs and extensive fraud. Our government has failed to recognize that providing services at a low or no cost can only lead to an overutilization of scarce medical resources and force dramatic rises in medical costs that we have all experienced. It is no coincidence that the explosion in medical costs occurred at the same time that government involvement in health care grew. Among those who do not understand the problem, there is a growing cry for even more government involvement. Surely throwing more oil on the fire cannot put it out. We advocate the following immediate actions to return to a period of affordable, quality health care. 1. Return decision-making regarding medication and treatments to patients and healthcare professionals. Eliminate government interference in these important decisions. Number 2, return all medical research to the private sector, where scarce resources can be focused on life-saving results rather than bureaucracy. 3, end government medical insurance and subsidy programs. Return these functions to private insurance companies and charitable organizations. As a nurse, I have watched with growing alarm as health care has become increasingly difficult to obtain. This is everywhere in the country. The more government has interfered, the less available it has become, and the more expensive are the remaining health services. This is a situation that all of us have an interest in reversing, and the steps outlined above will be a real first step in doing that.
Thank you, Margaret. You've now heard the entire proposal and recommendation from the program committee. Tomorrow, or Saturday rather, the program will come up for discussion and debate on the floor of the convention in this room. The bylaws provide no specific procedure for reviewing the recommendations of the program committee. Merely that to pass any plank requires a 2/3 majority of the quorum. Tomorrow you will be asked by the program committee to adopt a mechanism similar to that which the bylaws provide for the review of the platform committee report, so as to limit time for discussion on each plank so that we can get through at least a vote, yea or nay, on each plank. Hopefully, those which are not controversial, those which have that 2/3 majority, can then be adopted. It's not necessary to adopt them all, but at least this way we can produce a workable document with several planks, hopefully, that will be available to our candidates for the next 2 years. Before I summarize my remarks, I'd like to call on another member of the program committee, the only one who has not spoken, Tony Nathan, who would like to say a few words. Is that right, Tony? I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. I guess I misunderstood. Let me summarize then. I first got involved in the effort to have an LP program 4 years ago at the convention in Phoenix. There was a gap between our platform and what our candidates needed to go forth and market their ideas. We created the program, spent 2 years drafting one. That was not accepted at the last convention for a number of reasons, most of which related to prior dissemination, time to percolate ideas, discussion, and so forth. Hopefully, in the last 2 years, we've addressed those issues, which are internal issues within the party. There is still a need for a program. There has been, and there remains, and there always will be a need for a document which this party can use to market its ideas to voters based on topical issues facing them in their electoral decisions. When people outside the Libertarian Party ask me why I'm devoting my time to the program, I give them the same answer that I give when they ask why I devote my time to the party. As you well know, many people outside the party question the time we spend in these efforts as a third party. I always have told them that there are 3 reasons. Now, it's hard, unless you know the reasons, to know why it would always be 3. When I tell you, I think you'll understand. Their names are Brian, Susan, and Sarah, and they're my children. I think I share with every parent the desire that their children will grow up in a peaceful, prosperous, safe society. This program endeavors to take forward the ideas of this party and this movement to promote that. And that's why I've done this work, and I believe that's why other people have been involved in this effort in this party. And that's why the program committee and the national committee recommends adoption of this program in convention here in Philadelphia. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, I think we'd be glad to field them. Alicia Clark?
Yes, I have a question. According with the agenda of the convention, we don't have time to take the program. And according to the agenda, of course we have to approve and change if we want to. We have only 2 hours to take the bylaws committee report and 3 hours to take the report to the platform committee. And we just a little while ago were talking about the fact that 3 days is not enough to take these two items, and now we are giving them only 2 hours to one and 3 hours to the other one. How are we going to take the platform report?
The program committee's time on the agenda is not properly printed. Dean is currently researching exactly which slot we belong in and how much time has been voted by the national committee. But it will be on the agenda, and time has been reserved for it. I think on the order of 3 hours, if I'm not mistaken. The proposal that you will be asked to consider tomorrow by the committee is that we use a procedure very similar, as I said, to that for debating the platform committee's report. Our report is much shorter. It's limited to the preamble plus 10 planks. If we were to take, plus whatever might be presented from the floor, if we were to take 10 or 15 minutes on each, we could easily conclude it within the 3 hours. And again, I would remind you that the program, because it is not a living document, because once approved, it doesn't stay with us forever,
I think it does not require necessarily that last degree of precision and wordsmanship and word crafting that the platform does, since once adopted, something in the platform requires a 2/3 vote to change. Okay, so hopefully we will be able to get through a yea or nay vote on each plank. Vote them up, vote them down, but at least consideration will be given to each of the 10 planks in the preamble. Are there any other questions?